So our topic tonight is cultural awareness, community building, and engaging youth. Our speaker grew up in East Oakland. He has been an instructor and counselor at De Anza College over the last 13 years. He holds a BA in psychology, an MA in counseling and education, and is a doctoral student at USF. He has self-published 2 books for young adults. He launched a company called Hood to Higher Ed in the beginning of 2019, and I'll just read you the mission statement. Our mission is to inspire organizations to develop culturally relevant practices through critical literacy. Our aim is to enhance reading, writing, and critical thinking skills of urban youth by fostering knowledge of self. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Robert Alexander. Welcome, Robert, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I just want to thank you all for having me. I'm going to get started. If you could bring up those slides.
I will.
And I'm just going to probably just say next when I want you to navigate to the next one.
Sure.
All right. So, I was so thankful, that James was able to ask me to come in and present to the group. And I'm really just trying to just branch out and try different things. I've been working at De Anza for 13 years. And as he mentioned, I'm a self-published author, and this is my opportunity to kind of just talk more about what I do. Throughout the presentation, you're going to see different slides that are going to trigger different emotions. So if you have to take a self-care break, then go ahead and do that. I'm also going to be pausing this particular presentation so we can have a little dialogue. So I don't want it to feel like I'm talking at you. This is going to be a conversation amongst us all as community. All right, you can go ahead and go to the next one. So I typically start off with a land acknowledgement where I'm going to read the first paragraph, but then I'll look for a group member to read the second paragraph and the third one. All right. So the land acknowledgement goes, we remember that all non-native people to this land are settler occupiers, many brought against their/our will. We in the San Francisco Bay Area acknowledge the Ohlone people of this land that we live and work on. We pay our respects to their people, their elders, past, present, and future, and recognize that sovereignty was never ceded. It was never given up. If I can get a volunteer to read the second paragraph.
I'll read it, Rob. We also acknowledge the continued legacy of systemic racism stemming from the historic violence and destruction caused by genocide and enslavement. Processes of truth and reconciliation are necessary to bring about justice in our nation.
And if I can get one more person to read the last paragraph, and then we're going to pause for a 10-second moment of silence.
For
Do you have any
Aubrey, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, we invite you to take a moment of silence.
Now, after you have taken that moment of silence, I invite everybody back to the group. Next slide, please. So James had already kind of introduced me. I'm Robert Alexander. I've been working at De Anza College for 13 years, going on 14. And I'm a counseling instructor. I teach human sexuality. I've taught career life planning. And I've taught our version of college success, which we call life skills for higher education. I founded an organization called Hood to Higher Education a year and a half ago. And my whole goal was to bridge the gap between what's happening in urban communities, the inner city, as well as what's happening in academia. A lot of my friends growing up in East Oakland, we didn't see college as a viable opportunity, just based on our demographics. Growing up in the 80s during the crack era, the crack epidemic, it was disastrous. It essentially destroyed our community. And it was to a point where we weren't seeing a whole lot of positive role models. You know, there weren't, you know, computer engineers walking around and lawyers and things of the sort. So there was a very popular video called Hood to Hood, which kind of glorified things that were happening in different ghettos across America in terms of drag racing and sideshows, drug deals going bad, fights breaking out, you know, over various things. So I tried to flip the image of Hood to Hood and put a positive spin on that with my organization. And I named it Hood to Higher Ed, or Hood to Higher Education. And that was kind of the impotence behind it. And many of the 2 young adult books that I've written, they deal with the double consciousness of being someone growing up in an urban community and wanting more. So the double dilemma of either living in an urban community and wanting more, and striving to be better, but also recognizing where you come from. And so I'm going to talk more about that throughout this presentation, but that's just kind of a snippet, you know, my elevator spiel, as you will, of what my organization is about. All right, next slide. All right, so I try not to describe this particular slide too much, but I kind of want folks to just look at this slide. This is going to be a moment where we pause and just reflect. You could read the captions, look at the image, and let's just talk for a couple of minutes in terms of what do you see in this slide.
Hi, this is Roya. My interpretation is obviously showing you the lens to a white person's vision and what they perceive when they see someone of colored. As you can see in the glasses, it says weed and crack, and they have a pistol in their hand. So I think it's just kind of that stereotype of, you know, this is what we see when we see someone of color.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roya. Anyone else? And maybe I should pose the question a little bit different. When we envision a person of color, I'm going to be using the term person of color or POC throughout the presentation. When we're occupying these non-POC spaces or these non-urban communities where we're not predominant in these communities, what is the feeling that a person of color may have as we are entering into these different spaces that don't really reflect us? I want to take a couple comments from the group before we move on.
Well,
Robert, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Could you rephrase?
Okay, absolutely. So me as a person of color, me as an African-American male, as I enter into corporate spaces, as I enter into predominantly white institutions, PWIs, it doesn't reflect my background. What do you feel like the sentiments or the feelings that I have, or another indigenous person or another person of color, what do you feel like those feelings would be? What resonates with us as we enter into these spaces and we're seeing through these white vision glasses?
Yes, Karash?
Maybe like a feeling of not belonging, not being part of the mainstream, not really feeling at home or comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, Rosie?
Oh, I just would immediately go to a heightened sense of sensitivity, a heightened on alert, a heightened awareness of, is this a safe place? My whole system goes into, whoa, yeah, no, not a comfortable place to be in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosie. And that's absolutely it. It's not a comfortable. When I got this particular cartoon from Bettina Love's, we want to do more than just succeed. We want to do more than just survive. and she turns into the white vision goggles, and it puts me in the place of what Trayvon Martin may have been going through, right? Trayvon Martin was 13 when he was shot by George Zimmerman, and he was trailed after the officers told George Zimmerman to back off, that they were going to send somebody. So he used his survival. Trayvon tried his very best to use his survival tactics, and it still didn't work. So this kind of reminds me of that, because all Trayvon Martin had on him was some Skittles and I believe an iced tea. So I don't want to spend too much time. This is just kind of the introduction. All right, next slide. Now these are the various housing projects. These are some of the most famous housing projects. Very top left is Jordan Down Watts project in Los Angeles. It's in the Watts part of Los Angeles. They're featured in movies like Menace to Society. There was another movie called Original Gangster, and a very small snippet in a movie called Boys in the Hood. Top right is the Queensbridge projects, where several NFL and NBA players have come from, and probably one of the most famous rappers in the hip hop game, Nas, comes from Queensbridge, and this happens to be the largest projects in America, right? Bottom left is a New Orleans projects, the 9th Ward, called DiCaprio, and the bottom right is the projects that were the next block over from where I grew up in East Oakland. I grew up on 78th. The bottom right represents 77th and Greenside. And people are always like, well, why do ghettos exist? Why do Latino and African American males migrate to the ghetto? It isn't that we migrated to ghetto communities, right? There's a such thing as housing discrimination. And in the United States, this began after the abolition of slavery, right? It was a part of the Jim Crow laws, or what some people refer to as Jim Crow codes, that enforced racial segregation. The federal government began to take action, against these laws in 1917, where it was more interracial, there was more mixing, but the Supreme Court ruled in Buchanan versus Worley that they created ordinance where prohibiting Black folks from occupying and owning buildings, and that happened to be majority white, and vice versa. So they considered this unconstitutional for African Americans and white folks to be living together, right? Not to mention, because this could be a whole topic on its own, the redlining that took place, predatory lending, systemic racism, structural racism, overt and covert forms of racism while getting a home loan. So I wanted to highlight a few of those things. You could go to the next one. Can I get someone to read this caption?
Go ahead, Stephen.
White flight meant white people moved to the suburbs. Now, gentrification means they are moving back to the city's urban areas. Well, that's a question.
Yeah. So you have the young African kid looking at the lady side eye, right? White flight meant white people move to the suburbs. Now gentrification means moving back. So quick little history lesson. I'm not a history buff, but the Civil Rights Act of 1968, this included the legislation of what we called then the Fair Housing Act, right? And this made it unlawful for a landlord to discriminate against people of color based on their race, based on religion, gender, national origin, when advertising or even negotiating the property for sale or for rent, right? So after 1968, what we found is more and more individuals and communities were starting to kind of mesh together, right? So white flight or white exodus, this is a sudden large scale migration where white people from different areas became more racially and culturally diverse. And since it became diverse, there was that exodus that took place where white individuals leaving these urban areas or these mixed areas for areas that were more that reflected more predominantly white. Okay, so in terms of my organization, Hood to Higher Education, I know that many beautiful and wonderful things come from urban areas. I come from an urban area, right? So the next slide we're going to talk about in terms of Tupac, one of Tupac's very famous poems, "The Rose That Grew from Concrete." This it's the idea that we want to celebrate the tenacity of people that are coming out of poverty and making the most of their lives, essentially, right? So I'm going to read this. This is Tupac Shakur. If you don't know who he was a rapper, actor, activist, poet, right? He also created some iconic films like Juice, Poetic Justice, Above the Rim, Gridlocked. He was not only a rapper, but he wrote a book of poems. And he was a subject of a student-led course at UC Berkeley, focused on his life and lyrics. Tupac unfortunately was gunned down by the age of 26 in Las Vegas, and a lot of people think it was linked to the East Coast West Coast rap beef. But I want to read his poem. His poem says, "Now you see, you wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. This is the concrete, and these are my damaged petals." Right. So this is the whole premise behind the Hood to Higher Ed, making a way out of no way. Right. I'm just going to read that one more time. You see, you wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. This is the concrete, and those are my damaged petals. Now, I want to pause for a second and just kind of get comments, or what does that bring up for folks? And we could talk about any of the slides that we've seen so far, in any comments so far.
Very powerful. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm saying thank you like I wrote it.
Rob, I wonder if you could also say a little bit about the significance of Tupac to the Black community.
Tupac was almost considered a martyr. He was considered like an icon in terms of he had a following behind him. A lot of people, some people either viewed him as a thug in terms of like what he rapped about, but he also had a movement to uplift the poor. He had a tattoo on his stomach that said "Thug Life," and that was an acronym: "The hate you give little infants F's everyone." So he was proactive in the sense that he had days where he wanted the community to not sell drugs, like typically on Sunday or the weekend, or not sell drugs at all. He believed in educating the youth, right? He also believed in just the African American community doing better, you know. So in terms of him just being this monolith that some people kind of place him in this category of being a thug, he was a lot more than that. So you know, they looked up to Tupac to this day, and you know, and he's been gone for more than 15 years at this point. So he meant a lot to the African American community, and many of the rappers nowadays kind of base their rhyme pattern and the things they talk about, their image, on him. He was part of that Biggie Smalls East Coast West Coast kind of beef. So yeah, no problem. You could go ahead and any other comments before we go on? Okay, so this actually is another place where I just like to pause, and I want to just gauge what people are getting from this particular slide. What are we seeing in this visual? I'm big when I present to the class. I try to use images that stir up things to get us talking. What are people thinking when they see this image? What's resonating for you?
Go ahead, Fariba.
It's from the beginning. There is a chain put on the foot,
and obstacles, many
Mhm.
obstacles on the way.
Can we describe the people that's in the race?
Yes, the white man
Okay.
and an African American athlete, woman.
Okay. Okay. We have obstacles in the way. What picture is the illustrator trying to paint with this?
The amount of injustice and inequities.
Absolutely.
There is also, it returns to the white goggles. I have a sense that the white person doesn't even realize the amount of hurdles that are in front of the lady. So it just doesn't register at all, because it's the inverse of the Google that we've seen as the first picture, where you know, the white person sees a gun and when there is not, and those kind of things, or drugs where there are none. And here it's the reverse, where it doesn't even register that yeah, the distance is the same, but that's not the same stretch. So and I think it's unfortunate, but a lot of us have those Googles on, and sometimes our remarks to our Black friends are of this type. And what's the problem, right? My best friend is a Black person, that kind of thing. Those are remarks that belongs to that picture in my mind.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
One thing that comes up for me, Rob, is it's very superficial. The distance is the same. That's one small factor amongst many other factors, and that's where the attention is drawn to paint a false picture of equality, as if there's a level playing field here. And yet all of these barriers and obstacles that are in the way of people of color are more submerged. They're below the surface. And I think that's what contributes to what Patrick was just talking about, where a lot of white folks, they just don't see the inequities that are there.
Wow. Wow. Thank you all. Thank you all. The young woman on the right, she falls into what we call a double bind. It was also referred to by great educator and researcher, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She coined this phrase, intersectionality. Intersectionality. What two marginalized categories does the individual on the right fall in?
Go ahead, Kourosh.
She's Black and she's a woman. She's got, from society's point of view, she's doubly handicapped by society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It would be the same if it was like a Hispanic male that has some disabilities, or a disabled African American male, or a disabled indigenous male. There would be a double bind. I was in the grocery store, I think Safeway, about a week ago, and one of my elders came up to me and asked me to reach something off the top row, right? And I'm 6 feet tall, so you know, my consciousness kind of clicked in, like I'm an able-bodied male, like I'm afforded the opportunity to do certain things, you know, with my body, and I have to acknowledge that privilege. So thank you all for your comments. We are going to get into the next section of this presentation, where I'm going to talk about what we refer to as media propaganda that's essentially been happening. This is triggering, folks, right? So, but we're going to be stopping and taking little talks, just to debrief. But this has been happening since slavery, 1619. This is a picture of what we refer to as the minstrel show, right? Or minstrelsy. And it was an American form of entertainment that developed in the early 19th century. And each show consisted of comic skits, variety acts, dancing, music performance. It specifically depicted folks of African descent. And the whole intent was to kind of showcase us being lazy, kind of buffoonish, and some of them that we were superstitious and very happy-go-lucky. Like we were happy with how things were towards the end of slavery and through the Jim Crow era, right? So the shows typically were mostly white people in makeup or what they term blackface, and the purpose of, you know, playing a role of black people. And then it got so bad that, you know, if black actors were desperate enough, they got black actors to put on blackface, which is insane, right? So Tom Burrell, he wrote his seminal piece was called Brainwashed. And he said, the media speaks louder than mom. Neither parents nor teachers can compete with the power of media propaganda. If you are interested, he wrote a brilliant piece. His seminal piece is called Brainwashed by Tom Burrell. All right, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So good old Google, right? 1996, it had a few kinks when Google first came out. First of all, Google was invented by Larry Page and Sergey Brin in a friend's garage in Menlo Park, you know, right around the corner from De Anza. So they were working out some kinks. If you see this particular slide, when Google first came out, if you typed in the search, white people stole my car, Google would ask you, did you mean black people stole your car? Just want to let that sink in for a minute. All right, go ahead, go to the next slide. Okay, H&M. This is very popular chain. My kids actually put me on to H&M. They also put me on to Forever 21. And H&M was started by Hennes and Mauritz, is Swedish multinational clothing retail company known for its, you know, forward fashion for men and women, teenagers and the like, right? In 2019, H&M opened up in 74 countries with over 5,000 stores under the various company brands, right? With over 126,000 full-time employees. You can go to the next slide. Now, H&M, they released an ad that depicted a young African-American male, and his hoodie said, the coolest monkey in the jungle, right? When we have the young European descent child says, the survival expert. Now, for the life of me, I can't figure out now. Most retail, most big companies, they have a marketing team, right? Things have to be vetted before they go out into the broader world. So I want to read some of the things that was sparked from this particular ad and the article that came with it. It says the clothing retailer H&M apologized on Monday for an image appearing in its online store that showed the black child model wearing a hooded sweatshirt that said, the coolest monkey in the jungle. The company removed the image on Monday and said it would also pull the shirt from its stores worldwide, right? So this was in 2018. This was just a couple years ago. So the image was widely criticized online for its reference to a monkey and an animal that has long featured its racial and ethnic slurs. The Weeknd, he's a very popular pop star, a Canadian pop star of Ethiopian descent, was one of those who criticized the clothing giant, writing on Twitter that he would decline to work with the company in the future. In a statement, H&M said it agreed with those who were upset about the image. We are deeply sorry that the picture was taken, and we also regret the actual print, the company said in the statement. Therefore, we have not only removed the image from our channels, but also the garment from our product offering globally. So I want to pause again. I just want to get comments based on the last couple of slides that we saw. What is coming up for folks?
Go ahead, Karash.
Can't believe this is happening in 2018. It's just unbelievable. Like completely tone deaf.
Agreed. I also just, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but just interesting how the Caucasian boy is like looking at the young Black boy, in addition to what's actually on their sweatshirts. Doesn't look like a positive. Frightened or something.
Thank you for that.
I had another thought though. This was really interesting. Mangrove jungle, official survival expert. Look who's the survival expert. The white folks that have virtually decimated the planet. The colonists. So interesting. They're survival experts that are actually doing the damage, the greatest damage. So it's just a bit of a twist of thought as I looked at that. And then I flipped the monkey one too. Coolest monkey in the jungle. Yeah, honey, they're still rocking. So it was just a little bit of a twist that, you know, I got the original and then looking again, wow, are we going to be proud that I'm the survival expert? That puts me on the top dog. That makes me the king of the jungle. That makes me continue to kill everybody else. Not anything to be proud of.
Absolutely, absolutely. Others, maybe some folks that we haven't heard from yet.
Yeah, I'm curious how this is possible. As you said, there is an approval process. There's a marketing team, layers and layers that probably look at a product being introduced in the market. They looked at this. And you know, you always wonder where things like this happen, whether people are just completely oblivious. They look at it, they read it, but they don't get it, or they do it intentionally. And in business, you know, the main motive for decisions are profits, right? So you would think that somebody looked at this and knew that if you put this up, and if that person knew if they put this up, there's going to probably be an issue which will cause harm to the company from the profit point of view, and they still did it. So it almost leads me to believe that the person didn't know that, didn't get it. It wasn't anything intentional, because if it was intentional, and later the company has to take it back and has to apologize, this is not a good situation from a business point of view. So that's even a bigger problem. The fact that some layers of people, at least 2-3 levels of people before something goes to mass production, saw that and they didn't see any problem with it, that it didn't even register, it seems like. Because if it would have registered and they're good business people, they wouldn't have done it. And that is really scary, the fact that it didn't even register that this could be a problem.
It is scary. Go ahead.
There was a hand up first, Karash, then Fariba.
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm very affected by this. It just goes to show you, Omid, that they don't have diversity in the talent. You know, they got white people making the ads. They don't have enough diversity. Any black person who was on the marketing team would have seen, this is crazy. We can't do this. It's like from marketing on up to the executives is all white, and that's why they didn't catch it.
Thank you. Fariba?
Same here.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I may?
Yes, Omid?
Yeah. I just wanted to share, to me, it was actually a success. To me, it shows the level of conscious awareness that they put on a stop. They took an immediate action, because maybe it was previously they would just let go, but I think taking an immediate action, leading them to officially apologize and take the product, it was a breakthrough. And I think it's kind of a lesson to many other companies and organizations that they need to be mindful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was a hand up for Patrick.
Yeah. If we can return to the previous slide, because that's the one that bugs me. This one is about human bias, and we know that this is the kind of things that we see. No, I was looking for the Google one. I had a conversation today about this one, right? This one is the one that scares me. I had a conversation today about AI and machine learning in which biases are embedded. And the scary part about it, and this is one aspect of it, right? You write, white people stole my car, and the algorithm is correcting you with a bias. And so the reason this is one that's worrying me more now is because now it's embedded in everything that we have on our iPhone and that kind of thing. And it's even more systematic than someone in the marketing team completely oblivious of racial awareness, right? That's one team of people. This goes to the world, right? And so this is one aspect of bias that we may want to get worried about and watch for, because it is systematic by design, right? And so we didn't come to a magic conclusion in that conversation of mine, but it's interesting that you offered that. And I had a bad reaction to that because I started laughing, but I didn't laugh because I found it funny. I laughed because it actually hurt. and so I apologize for my physical reaction to this slide, but that's what I think we need to worry about on top of everything else.
Thank you, Patrick. Was there another hand up before we move on? Okay.
Wow, great comments, folks. And it's it's not my thing to do right and wrong or harp on opinions. We just generating discussion. So one thing.
Say something.
Oh, sure, Tamima, go ahead.
Sure.
You can see the participants who is raising. For me, when I looked at the picture, I saw a black child and a white child, and he's wearing a green shirt and he's wearing an orange shirt. And I thought for a moment, why is he wearing a green? And I guess that they saw that this color is nicer for him and this color is nicer for him. I didn't even look at the text. And I'm just curious if they were wearing the opposite shirts, would we even say anything? Why does it even come to the mind of someone to think that he's wearing the green shirt because of some reason? It just didn't came to my mind even to think about that.
Can I jump in?
Sure, go ahead, Johanna.
There's a lot of history behind the word monkey and Black people in the United States, at least. That you're not familiar with it is one thing, but there are a lot of people who are very familiar with that history, and doing something like this is incredibly insensitive, and insensitive is a nice way of saying it. For a company that large, they need to be aware of these kinds of historically significant elements. I'm not being able to express this clearly, but to a group of people, a large group of people, this is incredibly offensive. And that is what matters. Not necessarily that everybody recognizes, like that everybody's offended by it, but that there is a large group of people who have been persecuted for years, hundreds of years, using this term. I don't know if I explained that well.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah.
I just want to say that if I have to think that who I'm giving the green shirt, it already makes me to think, oh, he is black, then I need to think about it different. No, I don't think like that. I just, I don't know. For me, it's like teaching me to be racist.
It's not teaching you to be racist. It's teaching you to be aware of an existing problem, right? Because acting as if it doesn't exist is dismissing a problem that exists, and it doesn't allow us to confront it and solve it. Being aware of these things is necessary in order to fix it.
Thank you. All right, anyone else before we move forward? Okay, back to you, Rob.
Great discussion, folks. I mean, like I mentioned, this has been going on since the beginning of time. I was able to pick a few images. There's several hundreds of images like this that exist, believe it or not. As James and I were talking about, Tarzan in the early 1900s, the whole premise was there was the white savior that was going to come into Africa, and he was able to speak to the animals, and African ancestry folks that had been inhabitants of Africa were not able to do that, even though they're from Africa. And the whole idea was Tarzan was supposed to rescue them and get them out of this, get them out of situations of danger. So, these things have been pervasive, before many of us were invented. So, when I brought this image up, I did a lecture at De Anza College a year ago, and I brought this image up, a group of over 100 people, and folks were just in shock, and they really didn't know how the whole idea of an African American child or African ancestry child wearing a sweater that says, the coolest monkey in the jungle. They did not know how that was wrong. Okay, so as Joanne explained that, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So now we have basketball icon LeBron James, and this image stirred up controversy. One of the commentators even said that the photo, as perpetuating racial stereotypes, James strikes what some would say a gorilla-like pose, baring his teeth with one hand dribbling the ball and the other around Gisele Bündchen's tiny waist. If you look at the left, this uncanny resemblance to the 1917 Destroy the Brute poster promoting King Kong. So since slavery, white Americans have subconsciously associated Black people with apes, monkeys, gorillas, a primate, essentially. So Stanford professor Jennifer Ebenhardt, she's done extensive research on this, and she chronicles and has gone, around the world talking about this phenomenon. One of the commentators said, "I didn't see any racist overtone to it." She said, "I still don't. I think there was a hypersensitivity to race still in this country." So, LeBron, whenever he's playing against my favorite team, which is the Golden State Warriors, I do not like him. But I have to acknowledge some of the things that he stood for. And he has been, aside from this, because he made this in 2008, and I think he might have been a little bit naive to what was going on in terms of the resemblance. I think he just had, a breakdown, or he wasn't quite as educated as he should be. He has been the ultimate spokesperson for African Americans. You could go ahead and go to the next slide. So when we talk about some of LeBron James's contributions, not only is he a global icon, a global sensation, along with his LeBron James Foundation, he opened what the I Promise School is his preparatory high school, college prep school in his hometown of Akron, Ohio. And it wasn't a charter school. It's not private. You know, it didn't cost to get in. It's a public school, and he boasts that he has over a 90% graduation rate. And of those 90%, I think 95% get accepted into their college. You know, so on the left-hand side, he's wearing a shirt that says "I can't breathe," right? And these were the last words that were uttered by Eric Gardner, who died in July after a confrontation with the New York Police Department. Right, the incident was caught on tape, and this sparked national outrage. So most recently, we've had George Floyd, and we had Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. But there has been just a long list of deaths leading up to this, from the result of police brutality. So LeBron said, as a society, we need to do better. We have to be better for one another, no matter what race you are. But it's more of a shout out to the family more than anything else, because they're the ones who should be getting the energy and effort. So this is what he said when he was asked about his T-shirt, because whenever you're on a national stage and you make such a bold political statement like this, is going to rub some people the wrong way. There's going to be outrage behind this. So I'd actually like to just pause for a couple of minutes. I'm saying, so I have to, do I have to 8:30?
Yes.
Oh, okay, excellent. So let's pause. Can we just pause for a couple of minutes? Anything else that resonates with you, or anything that's on your mind that you want to mention to the group? All right, we're going to keep on going. Now, when I am working with the student, it is important for me to meet them where they are, right? So we have racialized trauma that we're experiencing. I had one student come to me, and she was taking a biology class. She was trying to get into Deanna's nursing program, and this was right after Trayvon had been shot and killed, and they had other African American students in this particular class, and the instructor got in front of the class and said, you know, that was really terrible what happened to Trayvon, you know, and launched right into their lecture. There wasn't no moment of silence. There wasn't no time to reflect. This teacher didn't refer the student to campus resources like psychological services or the counseling department where I work. The instructor just went right into the lecture. So, well, it was a good intention to acknowledge it, but African American students still needed to hear more. We needed to do more. So when I'm working with students in terms of dealing with racialized trauma and the coping strategies, I have to introduce them to ways in which to alleviate some of this trauma. And some of that has to do with self-care practices. So some of the bullet points say stretch, take a break from social media. I mean, this is huge because we're in the age of Instagram, Facebook, right? Twitter, where we're constantly being bombarded with images of violence and racialized image that are going to continuously be triggering to folks that are dealing with these things. So sometimes it's just good to just take a week off from it and not even have to look at it, right? My mother used to not allow me to watch the news because it tends to be a lot of bad things that happen on the news. Some of the things that I found effective that I've introduced to my students are journaling, right? Of course, we have students that are in crisis, whether work with students that are sleeping in their car. So we have shelters that I have to introduce them to. There are suicide lines, if it gets to that. I was introduced to meditation when I was in graduate school, and it's something that I practice to this day. We even have apps for meditation. One of my favorite apps is the Calm app, right? Read stories of resiliency, hope. I may share stories of where folks of color that were going through a dark time, a tough time, how they came out of it. What are the strategies that they employed to make the most of their situation? Breathe. It sounds very fundamental when they say, take 10 breaths before you have a reaction, right? It sounds very cliche to say that, but it actually works, you know, when you're able to kind of just slow down your heartbeat, slow down some of your biorhythms before you go on to the next phase of whatever you're going through, or just your day-to-day life, and prioritize self-care. This is something that needs to happen in our community more often, in all communities, right? You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So now, when I'm doing an assessment, brand new class, I do an assessment on me first. I ask, what is my definition of diversity? How do I view equity? How do I view inclusion? How am I inviting students into the conversation? How am I inviting students into the classroom? Okay. Do the learners in my classroom come from diverse cultural backgrounds? Right? So what are the perceptions of students from different racial or ethnic groups? Okay, language, dialects, are they different from mine? How can, if I have a room that is primarily Spanish speaking, how am I inviting their language into them? Am I going to have, if I don't speak, because I'm still working on my Espanol, but if I don't speak it to their level, I'm going to invite folks in, guest speakers that can connect with them on a cultural level in terms of what I'm trying to teach them. I'm trying to find a blend with what they already know and where I'm trying to direct that conversation, what I'm trying to get them to learn, essentially. Okay, what are the sources of the perceptions of students or the community that's in the room? You know, is it coming from friends? Is it coming from their relatives, their community? Is it coming from TV? Is it coming from media, movies? How do I respond to my students based on these perceptions, right? When I first started working at De Anza in 2007, I was young. You know, I was 28, 29, and I found myself in situations where people didn't believe that I had the proper information because of my youthfulness and because I was coming from a different community than they were used to working in. So I found myself doing a lot of proving myself, you know, posturing, you know, kind of shucking and jiving just to show them that I knew my stuff, right? But over time, that was exhausting, you know, and I had to just kind of just be my full authentic self, whether I was teaching a classroom or just in a counseling setting one-on-one. And I didn't want it to be something that was going to be to the detriment of my health and well-being, because I would run the risk of facing burnout. And burnout is real in counseling and in therapeutic session when you take on too much. The last one says, have I experienced others making assumptions about me based on my membership in a specific group, and how did I feel? You know, reality TV, you know, things that happen in the media. That's why it was important for me to show a few slides, important slides about media propaganda, because I realized folks are coming in with a perception. We all are inherently prejudiced. This is just the reality of it. We're not born this way, but we learn this in our community, right? So when you deal with systems of power or racism, there are people of color that don't have the ability to full-fledged be racist because we don't have any power. We are not the dominant force in terms of structural or systemic racism. We aren't. We don't typically make these broad sweeping decisions in terms of housing or in terms of who we let into our schools, or even the jobs for that matter. So, but we can be prejudiced. That exists, right? So how do we dismantle that? And how do we dismantle systems of white supremacy? This idea that white is the dominant race, right? White supremacy is not a bad word. It exists, but what do we do in terms of dismantling this idea of white supremacy? You can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so let me see. Assessment 2. Now, what steps do I need to take to learn the students' diverse background on campus and in my classrooms? I would tend to offer assignments that get me to learn about my students' background, because I don't know them when they first come in, you know, at the very beginning of quarter. So I would have a lot of dyads and triads, or a pair share where they're talking with their group and then they're able to express whatever they learn, you know, to the rest of the class, to the larger class as a whole. And in that, you know, I'm learning their neighborhoods, where they came from, their background, how they want their name pronounced. You would think something as simple as learning a student's name, you know, is something that every instructor does, but every instructor doesn't do that, because if you're teaching multiple classes, 3 or 4 classes, and you have 50 plus students in each class, it's really hard to do that. So I started to develop alliterations, where I would do a name game where you pick an adjective that starts with your name, and that kind of helped me remember their name. So one of my students would be Brilliant Benny, and I would see him on campus. I'm like, hey, Brilliant Benny. So something, a simple strategy like that, in terms of just learning students' name, responsiveness within the classroom. How often do social relationships develop among students from different racial or ethnic backgrounds in my classroom and on campus? What is the nature of these relationships? I do group presentations. You know, some students do not like it, I have to admit, but I've had more situations than not where students who I've introduced together in the class and they had to present, they will see each other a year from now or a couple quarters from now, and they became fast friends. They're like, hey, remember when we took Professor Rob's college success course and we had to do that presentation? Well, I'm thinking about going into business administration just like you are. Let's build. Can we study together? So I've fostered situations, relationships that way. In what ways do I make instructional program responsive to the needs of the diverse groups in my classroom? I have to listen to them. I have to. Part of good teaching is listening to my students, where they come from. I try to bring in a little bit of their flavor into the classroom. I try to bring in what they already know. And if you all lead groups or lead community discussions, I invite you to do that. I'm not all knowing. I'm just not. Things I research, and I try to tie it in to what folks already know, right? That this is being culturally responsive. What kinds of information and skills and resources do I need to acquire to effectively teach from a multicultural, inclusive, equitable, culturally humble perspective? You know, I think a lot of these words, equitable, cultural, they're buzzwords. They're words that are very popular right now. And you know, what I try to do is just be humble in terms of listening to students. I try to provide a humanizing experience. Sometimes I make mistakes in front of students. They find it hilarious, but what it does is it humanizes me to where they don't see me as this professor that's perched on this ledge and I'm unreachable. You know, I feared that when I was a college student. So I try to become that professor, you know, that takes the stigma away of being afraid to talk to someone, being afraid to talk to that professor. I want people to come up to me. So in what ways do I collaborate with other educators, family members, and community groups to address the needs of all my students? I'm in constant talks with different teachers, and I just trying to build my instructor toolkit is something that I've been focused on ever since I was a young instructor at De Anza. Like, how can I be better? The thing nowadays is everything is happening via Zoom, right? We have Zoom fatigue. There is a technology gap, right? Where I'm from in Oakland, they just started giving laptops through certain schools, K through 12, because no one was prepared for this. So when the fall hit, there were many students that didn't even have laptops to even start their work. So they pretty much got a month late start in terms of their instruction, right? So I have to realize that, you know, there's an opportunity gap, there's a technology divide. So I try to tap in with my students in terms of just asking them what are their needs and just referring them to programs at De Anza College where you may be able to go pick up a refurbished laptop, a refurbished PC where you could use in the meantime. Okay, I'd like to pause. Let me pause. I'm doing a lot of talking. Let me pause for a second and just check in with the group. Is there anything coming up, folks? Anything you want to make a mention, a question.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, Robert. I get into all kinds of discussions with my son, who's half Asian, about Asian Americans. What's your experience about how Asian Americans fit in this kind of complicated equation that you're talking about?
That's a great question. Now I'm just speaking stereotypically in terms of the dealings that I've had with Asian students. Many of my Asian students are shy in terms of whether or not to ask me a question for clarification. So I more so have to dig a little. I got to probe, right? I have to do more check-ins typically with my Asian students. This is a generalization. This is not for all Asian students, but for the ones that I've worked with in the past, they're shy and they're scared to ask me, questions of clarification as it relates to a quiz, a homework assignment, or test. So, I do a lot of, especially when I was in person, I do a lot of check-ins. How it manifests in the online format when I'm doing a synchronous class is I will post tons of questions in the chat or just reminders that they can email me or what my office hours are. But in all honesty, Stephen, many of my, and this is again is a generalization, many of my Asian students are on top of their work. I have been very blessed to work at De Anza College, where a lot of my students are coming from Mountain View and Saratoga and Cupertino High, and they have gone to prep school. So they come to De Anza with the intent to spend the least amount of time in order to get to their 4-year college. A small percentage of them look down on the community college experience, and they're upset that they didn't go straight into the 4-year college that they had planned coming out of high school. So they're using it as a stepping stone. They're using it as a way to get in and get out. And I respect that because I want to help them. I was a community college student too, and I know I didn't want to spend, more than 3 years at a community college. So my whole job is to get them in and out as quick as possible, give them the right classes that they need. They're undecided. I try to help them figure out their major in the shortest amount of time possible. So
yes, Geety.
Yes, according to Genome Project in 2003, they have proven that we are 99.9% the same. And, no matter what color our skin is, the blood is the same color. We all have the same color blood. So we are one family, oneness of mankind.
Thank you, Geety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else? Maybe some folks that we haven't heard from? Great. Let's go to the next slide. Some of the things I was able to do when I'm creating a culturally responsive classroom, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, I've done research on this. I've read a lot of literature on this, educational magazines. It begins with the self, right? So it starts with me, then I reflect out to the other and to the broader context in terms of, is there anything that's coming up for me? What do I need to work on? So one of the things is you're never going to know everything about a particular group. You're just not. I searched for diversity trainings. One of my favorite ones is called NCORE, 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 NCORE. And I try to put that in the chat. This is a once-a-year conference, and it stands for the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, where it went on for a week. And, they would have workshops, breakout sessions that dealt with overt and covert racism, microaggressions, even how to get through your dissertation phase, as a person of color, how to seek help. And I love that conference. So I tend to look for trainings, that's going to advance my career and help me. We must acknowledge the cultural and racial, ethnic, and class differences that exist among people, right? We have to acknowledge that. There's no way around it. De Anza is a melting pot. So there are going to be folks from different backgrounds that are going to be occupying the same space. We must acquire cultural knowledge as a way of demonstrating an openness and willingness to learn about the aspects of culture that are important to our students, right? And a culturally responsive classroom requires that instructors understand the ways that schools reflect and perpetuate discriminatory practice of a larger society. We must understand how differences in race, social class, gender, language background, and sexual orientation are linked to power. So who I am as a person, that happens naturally. I consider myself an activist. So each class that I teach is going to have some type of social activism in it. I'm going to point out disparities. Even when I teach human sexuality, I'm going to point out things that are happening in the world, and also things that we could do about it. That's who I am as a person. Now, when I started breaking out and forming my own group, the Hood to Higher Ed, that's pretty much the premise. I want to validate the voices that are not heard. You know, I want to give voice to the voiceless. That's my big thing. Now, I'm at the beginning of my educational consulting career, and I'm in the middle of my career as a counselor and instructor. So my goal is, after I retire from De Anza, is to break out on my own and do my own thing in terms of educational consulting. But that is a big tenet that I'm focused on, is the pointing out the discriminatory tactics in a large society, and how do we get folks from all different backgrounds, the marginalized communities, to kind of work together. Because what I see in larger society is people operating in individual silos. I do. I see the Black Lives Matter doing their own thing, right? I see Latino Heritage Month kind of doing their own thing for the most part. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't any merger. I see the LGBTQ plus folks doing their own thing, women's rights doing their own thing. I wanted to get to the point where the women's movement is working with Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ plus is working with Latino, and until we get this cross blend, of activism, I don't feel like my job will ever be done. So that's kind of what I'm looking towards. We have to all support one another. Hopefully you all agree, right? Because I think that's one of the tenets of the Baha'i community is just to be inclusive. How can we support each other? How can we build diversity and understanding and not tear down folks that are coming from different communities. I'm just big on that, to the core. You can go to the next slide. All right, so this kind of, some of these things I've already kind of highlighted, but I try my best to showcase positive perspectives on families. So let's say I have a predominantly white class and they're not familiar, they've never had an African-American teacher. And it's funny, I would ask my class sometimes if I'm picking up on a certain vibe, I would ask them, show of hands, how many of y'all have had an African-American teacher? And then maybe one hand to go up, one or two hands to go up. How many of you all have had an African-American male teacher? And then those two hands will kind of go down. This is me just kind of gauging the room. And in those particular classroom settings, for me, just my ego, I feel like I got to bring it even harder, because this may be their only experience in working with an African-American male instructor. So that's my whole perspective. I want to get them into seeing us in a different lens, other than sports, outside of, reality TV, outside of hip hop. No, we have very intelligent folks representing my community, right? We're not a monolith. Some of us are teachers, some of us are astrophysicists. We're coming from these different backgrounds. And that's kind of my opportunity to do that. So, I'm not one of those people that get down when I don't have a whole bunch of hands. It's just my opportunity to kind of shine. I love that. It kind of gives me goose pimples. So characteristics of a culturally responsive teaching, the teacher as a facilitator. This is that whole idea where I lecture. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm a lecturer. I have curriculum that I got to cover. There's no way around that. But in between those times, I try to engage my class in discussion. I want to hear their perspectives. So I facilitate. I'll bring up questions that have to do with any of my lectures, and I try to generate discussion based on not only where they come from, but where I'm trying to lead them. And I try to make that blend. Reshaping my curriculum. This is something that I typically have to gauge my class at first. So there's two things that take place. I will ask questions that center around what they already know on a particular topic. So I can give you a quick example. If I'm teaching about sexually transmitted infections in my human sexuality class, what I found is many of my students have had some form of health education in high school, right? So they are very knowledgeable. And I can't be one of those teachers that just assumes that my students don't have any information as it relates to that. So I gauge what they know, and then I'll pick it up from there. Whatever they know, whatever gaps that they have, I'll address those gaps. So that's me reshaping my curriculum. The other thing that I do is I try to, if I've taught for the Puente Project, which is predominantly Hispanic descent. So I may talk more about machismo that happens within the Hispanic community. If I'm teaching for Umoja, which is a predominantly African ancestry students, then I'll come from it from a Black perspective, right? Or I'll introduce more things. I'll introduce Black psychologists that were in the field, right? So it's just reshaping my curriculum to fit the design of the classroom. Student-centered instruction. I'll always have parts of the quarter where I'll have students lead the discussion, do a presentation, or do share outs. It's important to hear their voices. Culturally mediated instruction, right? So me just taking the background and mediating what goes on. Or if there are preconceived notions, I have to be the one to dismantle that. I can't wait for my student to do that. I'm the instructor, I'm the facilitator, so I have to mediate those particular preconceived notions or assumptions. I try to foster a sense of belonging and sharing cultures. And what that means for me is at the front end of the class, I would do as much as possible to build community. So there'll be exercises where I'll get the students to try to get to know one another. And that's so important, especially when I have bright-eyed, brand new green freshmen. Like this essentially, I'm getting them at the very beginning. So I want to be the one to make their college experience as wonderful as possible, and just to let them know, like, oh wow, man, college is dope. This is great. Like I really want to do this. Like, my instructor has, tore down all these walls to where my thinking was, I don't even like school, but now I'm seeing that I can actually do well at this. So there's a lot of community building in my classrooms. Yeah. Any questions?
Yes, Roya.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to make a comment. One, the way you speak makes me want to come to your class and listen to you teach, sign up for a course. Two, I just wanted to say that I, just based on hearing you speak this last hour, I feel like it takes a lot of, what's the word? The way that you explain how you try to conduct your classes and the things that you think about for your students. I think that it's not an easy situation to be in, because there are so many barriers already that you're facing. Even just saying, hey, who here has had an African-American professor, or who here has had this experience? I feel that it's almost like it's very nice to see that the way that you speak is almost like you're not going in there defensively, where that there are these negative connotations, or that there are things going on like people might look at you and have assumptions that are completely incorrect, but you go in there with that attitude. It seems from by the way you're speaking that you're very open-minded and you're there to show them that, hey, probably the things that you've heard or the things that you think aren't necessarily true. But the way that you speak and just based on the slides that you've shared, I don't know how to say it in a way of like, I feel very proud of you as a person that you can go into that environment and be that way, because I put myself in that situation, and I've been in situations where I was living in Ethiopia for a few months and everyone was staring at me all the time. And I've never been in that situation where people are looking at me and pointing their finger at me. They were calling me like Mariah Carey. They were calling me Britney Spears. They were calling me all sorts of names. But having that attention on me, it made me want to like isolate myself because I felt kind of shy to be outside. And I felt kind of like embarrassed that people are going to talk to me or say things to me. So putting yourself in that situation with the attitude that you have, and just you seem very loving, and you want people just, you just want to create an awareness. I think it's a really amazing quality. And I just wanted to say that to you because I know it's like the world is it can be very negative and scary, but I really admire that attitude that you have. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Roy. I mean, I think that was my intention, because I know that students want to feel whole, and I as an instructor want to feel whole. And I think it's a humanizing experience. Off the cuff, I remember the first time I saw one of my teachers out in public. And I was fortunate enough to have a few African American teachers, one in elementary school and then two in junior high, which is now middle school. But I saw one of my teachers at the grocery store, and it was just like you don't think your teachers go out grocery shopping, right? But they have to eat too. So it was a very humanizing experience. And whenever I have an opportunity, I might not be able to, because I'm rushing for meetings. I'm rushing, I have to do a lot of switching, going from counseling to teaching a class. But a student may have a question and I might be short on a meeting. I do a lot of what's called walk and talks. So we'll walk across campus and we just talk, in the African-American community, we say, chop it up. So we chop it up. Sometimes it could be about things that we see on TV, or, hey, did you see the last game? But it always inevitably goes back to their life or a question about the class. And I just try to keep it as authentic as possible. So this is who I am. So I really appreciate your comments, Roya. Really, that means a lot, because I want that to be conveyed, because I was one of those students, especially when I transferred from Chabot to San Francisco State. I saw that there were lecture halls where we had over 400 people in it. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to sit in the back and take notes. And sometimes I didn't even feel like being bothered in class. And that wasn't the most effective way for me, to learn. So I had to become more assertive. I had to introduce myself to folks and start joining these study groups, because I thought naturally people would just come up and introduce themselves to me, and it didn't work like that. So I try to introduce that to the students early on. So I appreciate your comments.
Rob, we had a hand up, Jenny, and then Karash.
Rob, I'm curious. I don't know how to make this come out right, but if this is a moment where we're at a tipping point, and this really will be a change where we look back and say, yes, the seesaw swung. How do you get kids to trust each other and reach out to each other, and get rid of the us and them that we've had for so many years? Now, how do you get them to over that hurdle to hug each other? So
it's difficult. It's a challenge. I do exercise where I try to get them to see similarities in themselves. So I'll have an exercise where I'll have them line up. I'll break them up in groups, and I'll ask them a question. How many of you all are traveling over 10 miles to get to De Anza, right? And then based on where they're coming from, they'll line themselves up from the shortest distance to the longest distance. Right? How many of you all are traveling more than 20 miles, more than 30 miles? And then you'll meet students that are coming all the way from the East Bay to the South Bay to the answer. So they strike up that conversation. Oh, I'm traveling this distance. How many of you all went to this high school? So, you know, how many of you all are over the age of, etc.? Are any parents in the room? Are any folks working part-time? Any folks working full-time? So I try to generate discussion based on similarities, and then students, they'll get to see, oh, wow, well, I'm not the only one juggling going to school full-time and working full-time. I'm not the only one. Let me talk to such and such and see how she's doing it. Let me see if this student is a part of study groups, and how can I get involved? Oh, wow. So y'all meet every Tuesday at Pete's Coffee at 2:00, and y'all go over pre-calculus. I'm in pre-calculus and I'm struggling. I want to be a part of that. So I try to do as much bridge building as possible. Thank you, Jenny.
There was another hand yes, Karash.
Robert, you are an amazing teacher. I echo what Roya said. Your class must be just so interesting and engaging. I would love to attend, except I live in Seattle. I think one thing that you're really brilliant at is this teacher as facilitator. You seem to have this down like really, really well. You kind of combine transmitting knowledge plus getting feedback from, I can just see from this little session that we've had, you're so good at bringing people, getting them to talk, but then also giving them something to think about and then giving them some knowledge. You're just really good at that. And I would like to learn a little bit of that skill. I'm considering a career change and maybe getting into education. And I'm wondering if you mind if I communicated with you personally. Would that be
I don't
okay?
mind at all, Karash. Let's definitely keep the lines of communication open. I have a slide. Would you mind going to that last slide where it has my information, because we're running low on time. I had some scenarios that we're gonna yeah, this is the one. So my website is Hood. I don't know if you want to take a picture of that or screenshot it, but my main website is Hood to Higher Education. That's Hood #2 highereducation.com.
Got it.
And it doesn't have to be all caps. I just did it so you can see it better.
I also got your email address from De Anza College. Is that also possible to use? Your De Anza
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me put it, I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
All right. Thank you.
Can we go back to the slide with Joy DeGroot, because many of us know her, and I was wondering what you were going to say about her.
Yeah, let's go to that slide.
Forward.
When is it?
Back one. That was the second last slide. The other way. Yeah.
Okay, these are some of my favorite books. I didn't have much to say that De Anza was lucky enough to feature Dr. Joy DeGroot on our opening day. And she wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Can y'all all see this book?
Just pull it back a bit.
I'm sorry.
And up a little more. Yeah. There you go.
Many of us know Joy, and we also know her brother Oscar. He used to work with our youth group.
Oh, okay. So I don't have to give you the premise, but she's just a phenomenal speaker and teacher. Is who I one day hope to grow up to be. Really, other books that I've enjoyed over the past several years is for white folks who teach in the hood, and the rest of y'all too. Reality, Pedagogy, and Urban Education by Christopher M. Dean. One of my favorite books also is by Dr. Bettina Love. We want to do more than just survive. Abolitionist teaching in the pursuit of educational freedom. Her premise is we need more than just allies at this point. We need what she described as co-conspirators. And a co-conspirator is somebody that is of non-person of color descent who has the ability to put themselves on the line, whether it's stand up for the marginalized community, whether it's take on some type of challenge that a person of color is going through, as opposed to the talk, the lip service that might happen when we take a diversity class or go through a diversity workshop. We need more than that at this point. And it's also where I got that image of the white vision goggles from. That's in her book. She's phenomenal. Another book that I enjoyed is Tim Wise's White Like Me. Can we see this? Can y'all see this book?
Yes.
And Tim Wise is just an amazing person. Just an advocate for marginalized communities, indigenous communities, and how to build community in general. I did want to mention my books. If you all have educators that you work with, my first book, Can't Let Nobody Ride My Bike, it's a coming of age story based on my life. It's a memoir. This is appropriate for middle school on up. And it deals with the peer pressures of drugs, sex, and violence experienced in urban communities, and how I kind of was an academic during the crack era, and how it was kind of hard for me choosing a side. Did I want to focus on the books? Did I want to go the street way? And inevitably, the books won out because of my parents. I had strong parents. I'm a product of a playwright and a librarian. So started writing this 3 years ago, and was able to publish it at the beginning of 2019. Another young adult book that is more centered for a younger group, 3rd grade on up. She Hit Me First. And this deals with the main character, Jamila, who learns hitting through her mom. So how she acts out in classroom settings, at school, on the playground, is she thinks that is the way to solve her problems, is to hit somebody back. Because whenever she got in trouble, her mom would hit her. So this deals with generational trauma, generational violence within the African American community, where spankings still are being dealt out, almost as a rite of passage. And we have to dismantle that. There are so many ways to conflict resolution other than hitting someone, right? Because you'll hear war stories where we play what I call the trauma Olympics. Oh no, I got hit with a big switch, or I got hit with a Hot Wheel racing track. It's like, what are we teaching our students? And I would get into arguments with my friends about it. So it was very cathartic for me to write that book, because I got spankings, to the point where my little sister would have to jump in and stop my dad from going crazy on me. So I wrote about it, and I dealt with some of that in therapy as well. So you could feel free to follow me on Instagram. And I know we're coming to a close, but I really enjoyed this talk.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. I think I speak for the whole group when I say that this has been just a tremendous gift. You didn't just bring us information, you brought us your whole self. And I was especially moved by everything that you shared today. So also, for those of you who wish to follow up in some ways, I will include all of these links and addresses and contacts and the 2 books and all of that in the next email that I send out to you. So Rob, again, thank you so much. And to the whole group, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.